Hi, folks. We are going to give everyone just one more minute and then we will get going. We have everyone muted. We've got a very full set of registrants for the webinar today. But if we have time later for more of a discussion, then we will take the opportunity at that time to unmute you or allow you to unmute yourself. So, all right, so I had said that we were going to give folks about 2 minutes to join. Hi, Amy Clark Eagle here. I am the Director of Science and Certification for the Forest Stewardship Council here in the United States. I'm joined by my colleague, Justin Meyer. We also have a number of the participants in our technical working group and in the standard development group that worked on development for draft 1 of our revised FSCUS National Forest Stewardship Standard. All right, so I am going to begin by sharing my screen. All right, and Justin, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the first slide, the opening slide? Excellent. Okay, so before we go any further, just in case we have some discussion or the chats later on, I do want to remind everyone that as participants in this meeting, we need to be mindful of the constraints of antitrust laws. There shall be no discussions of agreements or concerted actions that may restrain competition. This prohibition includes the exchange of information concerning individual prices, rates, market practices, or any other competitive aspect of an individual company's operation. Each participant is obligated to speak up immediately for the purpose of preventing any discussion falling outside of these boards. Thank you very much. Okay, we are currently in the middle of the first public consultation on the revised draft version 2 of our US Forest Management Standard. The consultation began on December 5th. It's running for 75 days through December 18th. Just a reminder that to be considered, comments do need to be submitted through the FSC consultation platform. You can find a little bit of information about how the consultation questions are organized and some suggestions for perhaps how to consider prioritizing your review of the draft standard, plus many additional resources at our consultation web pages. You can see the web address right there. This is part 1 or phase 1 of our first public consultation, and this is addressing the base indicators. So the indicators that are used by most of the FSC certificate holders here in the US. In a couple of months, we'll be initiating a phase 2, and that consultation will focus on indicators that are based on scale, intensity, and risk. So the family forest indicators and alternative indicators for plantations, along with the supplementary requirements for US Forest Service lands. For today, the objective of this webinar is actually to have FSC, me, spend as little time as possible presenting, but instead have as much time as possible for questions to try and help you be better prepared, better understand for when you do submit your formal consultation comments. We had originally hoped to have more of a discussion today, but due to the number of participants who've registered, last time I looked it was nearly 60, we're going to really focus on the questions first, and then if there's time, maybe we can get into a little bit of discussion at the end. So in terms of ground rules, we're asking that you submit your questions via the chat box. Just remember, everybody can see them. And we are asking you to remain muted. At this point, we've got everyone on a involuntary mute. But later on, if we open that up, we're going to ask you to still stay muted unless you're speaking. And please also remember that this webinar is being recorded and will be making it available to others on those consultation web pages. For today, we have 3 topics that are going to be the focus of the webinar. As noted, I'm going to be speaking as little as possible, just providing a bit of background and information. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the issue overviews for a more thorough background. And then we'll open it up and try and address the questions that we receive from you. So moving into the first issue for today. The regional requirements. So our existing standard continues to retain within it a fair number of requirements that were in the original 9 regional standards that were developed back in the 90s and the early 2000s. These have been primarily held within Annex C and Annex E. One of those is focused more on even-age silviculture, and the other one is focused more on streamside management zones. Over the years, there has been a fair bit of confusion about when these are applicable, how they're applicable, why does it seem like there's some really duplicative stuff in there. There's concern that when we have a new potential certificate holder looking at the standard, they may not be aware of how those annexes come into play and that they're actually normative and required. So, excuse me, one of the priorities for this revision process was to eliminate those annexes and then bring any of the indicators that were needed or identified as still being needed into the main body of the standard. As the technical working group looked at this and considered how to do this, and then again, similar conversations at the level of the standard development group, the question began, these were regional requirements that were based on science and the information that was held 20 or more years ago. And that there is a sense that we really do need to take a deep dive into the scientific literature and look really hard at what's known, what are the research results that have been achieved since then, and are there changes that should be considered as part of the regional requirements in the FSCUS standard. So FSCUS is making a commitment to actually invest in this really deep dive, this kind of evaluation between the revision process that we're doing now, which is developing a version 2 of the standard, and the next revision process that will be coming a number of years down the road, which will be developing a version 3 of the standard. So at this time, we are not intending to do this really substantive in-depth review for the purposes of the current revision process. There have been some limited changes that were incorporated into draft 1, the one that's out for publication right now. And getting to those, the regional requirements were moved out of annexes and into the main body of the standard. When they were brought into the standard, they were brought in as supplementary requirements. So that means that any situation where one of these appears, the certificate holder would need to be in conformance with both the base indicator and the supplementary requirements for the region in which their management unit occurs. There's a couple of places, but primarily these are linked to indicators 665 and 675, which are again focused on even age management and riparian management zones. There was an effort to try and streamline, to remove duplicative elements, to try and reduce the number of words and really focus on what's the intent of the indicator, reduce the number of those supplementary requirements when possible. There was also an effort to try and increase the feasibility for organizations to come up with rationale for when exceptions to those regional requirements might be ecologically appropriate. And so that's indicator 666 and 676. which provide those opportunities for those developing rationale for exceptions. There were some changes in the opening limits and retention requirements related to the Appalachian and the Southeast region, so I will call that out. Additionally, the Standard Development Group is asking for input. There's a consultation question that's specific to dry forests in the Pacific Coast region. And the Standard Development Group is asking for input on this topic that they can then incorporate into draft 2 of the standard. Turning the focus to the boundaries, to the regions themselves, these boundaries have generally remained the same for draft 1. They do generally and broadly represent the different regions of our country. They're based on a mixture of ecological and geopolitical divisions, but still kind of have that broad boundary sense. One change was incorporated into draft 1. That was at the northern boundary of the Appalachian region. I've got a map I'll show you in just a second. But we do want to recognize that with the deep dive that FSCUS is committed to doing into looking at the scientific literature and the potential implications for the regional requirements, that could possibly also result in some changes in the boundaries. But again, that's looking down the road to the point at which we're working on developing a version 3 of the standard. I want to highlight that, again, the Standard Development Group is requesting input into some questions around the Ozark-Ouachita region. So you'll see a consultation question that's specific to that particular topic. All right, so here's a map. You can see most of the boundaries have remained the same. Up here at the northern end of the Appalachian region, there is a portion of what used to be in the Appalachian region that would now be in the northeastern region moving forward, and a very small piece of the northeastern region that would be becoming part of the Appalachian region. This line, the boundary that we're using, is based on the most recent version of the Cleveland ecoregions. And I think that is the background that I have on the FSCUS regions and regional requirements. So the idea here was that we were going to have some questions in the chat box to which we would be able to respond. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for now. And hopefully we'll get a couple of questions in the chat box, anything related to the FSCUS regions or the regional requirements. And if not, then we may be able to. Okay, so Robert Ruiz is asking when version 3 of the standard will be developed. So we are, at this point, we're required to do a review at least once every 5 years. Obviously, this did not happen over the most recent period of time. It's been 10 years since our last revision. Moving forward, we would be looking at a revision, you know, at minimum, considering that revision at 5 years. I think that because we'd be looking into this particular issue, if something came out of it suggesting that there was a significant need for revisions to the regional requirements and or to the regional boundaries, we'd be more apt to have that 5-year revision, or possibly even get started on it sooner so that it was a quicker turnaround. Okay, then we have a question. And so Justin, I was going to ask you to curate this, but looks like I'm going to be able to see them okay on my own. We have a question. Can you share more about how certificate holders would be able to have deviations from the regional requirements Does it still require independent scientific review, or what is the standard or expectation? So Sarah, thanks for the question. The specifics of that, I would actually point you to the draft one itself. For both of the indicators, there have been a number of changes in terms of the emphasis, yes, on still having expert input, not necessarily independent in all cases. And there's some of the words that have been perceived as being making the focus of those exception indicators very narrow in terms of limited or in very minor occurrences or those kinds. There was an attempt to try and broaden the potential use of those variance type indicators to make them more accessible and more feasible, hopefully less resource intensive for the certificate holders who wish to use them. Okay, why no distinction between the Northern and Southern Rocky Mountains while splitting the Southern Rockies in half? So I think that the question there has to do with the difference between the what's called the Rocky Mountain region and the Southwest region. We would need to go back to, again, those original 9 regional standards and the rationale and decisions about when the regions were divided up at that time. I think that pointing out issues like this in terms of comments to help us moving forward are important. And definitely that's the kind of thing that we would want to be looking at very carefully as part of this kind of deep dive and in-depth review coming in the coming years. Okay, why are the regional boundaries for everywhere except the Pacific Coast region along the ecoregion lines instead of the political state lines? And again, I think that this comes back to decisions that were made about the regions were made some time ago. And I don't have, and I've been looking and I don't have a lot of the original rationale for why those regions were developed the way they were. Throughout the process that we've been going through over the last couple of years, there's been a number of conversations about making shifts and changes in the regions and the boundaries. There's a lot of concern about the potential implications to certificate holders who have established policies, processes, things in a particular region, and the consistency and not creating too much disruption. I do think, again, that this is something that will need to be considered and looked at moving forward. And I also will point again to the consultation question that's regarding dry forests in the Pacific Northwest, and just looking at the potential impact of the regional requirements and how things are set up for those dry forests in the Pacific Coast region. All right, for regional requirements then, other than the changes that have specific consultation questions, are they basically unchanged? For the most part, yes. As I noted, there were some, for the even age management supplementary regional requirements for the Appalachian region, and then there's supplementary guidance for the Southeast region. There were some changes, slightly more substantive changes in those 2 regions. For the most part, the other regions have been, there's been some streamlining, like I said, to try and really focus the language more specifically on the intent, to try and increase consistency in terms of terminology and how the different, the approach and the language that's used between the different regions. So there have been some changes along that way, but like I said, the more substantive ones were for the even age management in the Appalachian region, and then guidance for the Southeast region. please explain why the changes to Ozark-Ouachita region will be considered. Yeah, so as part of the conversations that have been ongoing, there have been some questions that have come up as to the Ozark-Ouachita. It's a region in the center of the United States. It's divided into two subregions. And there's been discussion and question about those two subregions, that the two subregions themselves are really not very similar to each other. I'm not as familiar with the area myself, so I'm just sharing what has come through the discussion, but that those two subregions may in fact be more similar to the other FSC regions around them than they are to each other. And so that's the question about how to configure, how to look at the Ozark-Ouachita region moving forward. Is there a GIS layer that we can use to examine our managed lands that will fall within those new regional boundaries? So if you're talking about the change up in the northern part of the Appalachian, between the Appalachian and the Northeast region, yeah, definitely. We've got a spatial data layer that we're able to share and help with anyone who wants to look at the potential implications there. So question, are we considering these issues in the context of U.S. Forest Service lands or in general? And where does the U.S. Forest Service connection come into play? All right, great question. As I noted at the beginning of the webinar, and hopefully you heard me, so this is a great chance to revisit this. The consultation that we have going on right now is for just a part of the draft 1 standard. And it's for the base indicators, the indicators that will be used by most of the FSC certificate holders out there. However, we've had in our standard, in the existing standard, we've got the family forest indicators, and there were also indicators in Principle 10 that were more focused on plantations. And then in 2019, we had the addition of supplementary requirements for U.S. Forest Service lands. So those three pieces are going to be part of a second phase of the draft 1 consultation. The technical working group and the standards development group are working on those parts of it right now. We separated it out into 2 pieces to assist us with our internal resource management. It started becoming too much to handle all at once. And so this way we figure on our part, and hopefully also on the parts of those of you who are reviewing and looking at the materials. This will help you to focus at different times on different types of certificate holders and potential certificate holders. So the U.S. Forest Service lands and supplementary requirements for U.S. Forest Service lands will be part of the phase 2 consultation coming in another couple of months. All right, thank you, Justin. A reminder, it's time to change topics. All right, appreciate that. So with that, if you have additional questions on regional requirements or regions, please continue to put them in the chat box. We will do what we can to develop some kind of response and get that back to you. But otherwise, we need to move on to our next topic. Okay. And hopefully this will work. All right, Justin, can you thumbs up for me again, please, if you can see the climate change? Great. All right, so our next topic is climate change. So our FSC's mission, it's focused on the provision of ecological, social, environmental benefits from forests to people and the other, the animals, wildlife, others that are dependent upon those forests. It also is a component of a very long-term view in thinking about the continued provision of these benefits to future generations. So achievement of this mission is being affected by climate change and by the changes that are affecting the provision of benefits within forests. Climate change is already having an impact on forest health and productivity, particularly in certain parts of the world and in the US. And our standard is one of these core tools for achieving the mission, and also for the achievement of responsible forest management here in the US. And if we're going to do this and achieve these things, we need to be thinking about, and we really believe that our certificate holders need to be thinking about these anticipated future conditions and the potential impact on how they may or may not be able to achieve the management objectives or future desired conditions that they had really wanted to for their management unit. Additionally, one of the benefits that forests provide is the storage of forest carbon, and this is now considered one of the ecosystem services, which is essential and beneficial in terms of forests. And as the Standard Development Group looked at this and considered this really important benefit of the forest, particularly those that are FSC certified and those that are responsibly managed, they also recognize that there's a really, really strong and growing demand to recognize forests as natural climate solutions. And therefore, with all of these, they felt that there was this very important need to ensure that we were incorporating these different aspects of climate change and climate change adaptation into the US standard, forest management standard. Okay, so for draft 1 itself, there are a small number of new indicators that are directly linked to climate change, and 1 or 2 indicators where it's a new component within an existing indicator. And this is addressing both climate change adaptation and forest carbon as an ecosystem service. As the technical working group and the standard development group were working on this, they did work on trying to align the new requirements with existing climate change adaptation frameworks. In particular, we worked closely with the folks at the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. They're a USDA climate hub, and they helped us in terms of looking at where would be key places to consider climate change in the standard, and also in development of the new Annex L, the climate change toolkit. Behind all of this was, while it was a priority to incorporate climate change into the standard, there was also a realization that while many of the certificate holders may already be doing this, some would not. And we wanted to make sure that there was lots of support, information about resources, information about how to potentially approach this. And that's in the climate change toolkit. And then also the indicators themselves were intended to be relatively flexible in terms of how they were implemented so that each certificate holder could incorporate them into their own management system. Specifically in Principle 6, there is a new piece of the assessment that's required when the assessment that's required for considering which environmental values may be affected by management activities. And as part of this, one of the values that needs to be considered are ecosystem services, including carbon storage and carbon sequestration. And then additionally, as part of this assessment, there's now an expectation that the certificate holder will consider potential future impacts of climate change and catastrophic natural disturbances on the values that they identify through that assessment process. There's an additional new indicator in Principle 6. It's an optional indicator. It's intended to encourage longer rotations with the knowledge that that will likely result in increased woody biomass and carbon. The trade-off here is that there's also through that an opportunity to have greater exceptions and variances on some of the regional requirements related to opening size and retention. In Principle 7 focuses on management planning, and there's a new indicator that has two components to it. One is including a consideration of how climate change may affect the achievement of management objectives and desired future conditions, taking information, what you know about the potential future conditions in the area where the management unit occurs. What could that potentially mean in terms of whether or not you'd be able to do what you had, what you would like to be able to do. And then also, if there are any adaptation strategies identified, that the descriptions of these would be included in the management plan. There's a new indicator in Principle 8, which is directly linked to the one that's in Principle 7. Principle 8 focuses on monitoring. So this is monitoring if there have been any changes in the potential impact of climate change on the achievement of management objectives and desired future conditions, and then also monitoring the effectiveness of any climate change adaptation strategies that are implemented. Finally, in Principle 10, there is a new indicator, and it's related to regeneration activities following harvest. And this indicator adds flexibility in the potential for using non-native species for regeneration if it's part of a climate change adaptation strategy. And there's some different additional layers there in terms of the priority of what types of non-native species to be considered. And there's in draft 1, there's a limit to considering just North American non-native species that are not native to the management unit, but are native to North America. Additionally, there's a new indicator, and this one was also part of aligning with the revised principle and criteria, but it expects an increased emphasis on increasing resilience of ecosystems to catastrophic natural disturbances. And as we know, in many parts of the country, there's an expectation that we'll be seeing an increased frequency and potentially also severity of catastrophic natural disturbances. Okay, so again, I am going to stop sharing my screen for now and then go back to the comments. All right. Mass timber construction industry insists on ignoring ecosystem services. Thank you for the comments, Scott. If there's a question that you would like to link to that, I'd be happy to try and respond or ask others who are here to respond. Okay. Do any of the new indicators explicitly address fuels management, particularly in fire-prone and dependent forest types? So, Robert, I think that's one of the focuses of that new indicator, which is about increasing the resilience to catastrophic natural disturbances. But instead of making it specific to one particular type of catastrophic natural disturbance, the indicator is written to consider whatever the disturbance factor may be for the region in which your management unit occurs. So I think that's exactly what that indicator is trying to get to. But instead of just calling out just one type of disturbance, it's intended to encompass many, whether it's hurricanes, if there's parts of the country where there may be catastrophic droughts anticipated. I don't know, I haven't heard anything about tornadoes, but it's possible, or other wind events. For the optional indicator, Is it about maintenance of longer rotations or about promoting longer rotations? So my understanding of that indicator is that it's about promoting longer rotations, trying to change and increase the length of longer rotations. And then climate change and fire, is salvage logging addressed? So salvage logging is not in the existing standard. It's not explicitly addressed on its own. And there were a number of different discussions about salvage logging and whether or not to have an indicator which was specific to salvage logging. There is not one included in draft 1, but there is a question, a consultation question that is specifically about salvage logging. So if you feel strongly one way or the other, or think that the standard should be addressing it explicitly, or have suggestions on how that could be done, I would really encourage you to respond to that particular consultation question. As to Robert's question, so Tim is helping us out with a specific link to where it is in draft 1. Thank you, Tim. What is your definition of effectiveness monitoring? So actually at this time, Scott, there is not a specific definition in the draft as to what is effectiveness monitoring. If you feel that that's something that really needs to be, if you think there's some fuzziness or question around what would be the expectations around that concept, please provide us with comments along those lines, and perhaps even a proposed definition that we could include in the glossary of the standard. Seems like slight changes on managing invasives, where the interest to increase from acting when feasible to something more rigorous. Andrew, is this, is this a question on invasives as it relates to climate change? Is there a link there that you think we should be made in the standard? All right, so we'll see if Andrew comes back with another one. We have just a little bit of time here, and we didn't at the end of the last section, but I did want to ask a couple of our standard development group members who are on the call. Our FSCUS Board of Directors is serving as the standard development group. And I did want to, since we have a bit of time, ask for a couple of them who might be willing to say something. So our chair of the standard development group is Paul Vanderford. And Justin, if you can find Paul and unmute him. Paul, I know you and I had talked a little bit about regional requirements today. If you wanted to say anything about that, or potentially just generally about the emphasis and the work of the standard development group, that would be really helpful, I think.
Thanks, Amy. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you for the presentation, and thank you for everyone on the call. What I definitely would like to appreciate is that we are only as strong as you make us, and that the 3 chambers that we have are our greatest strength, and the feedback we get and the engagement we get are a critical part of that. So you being here today really makes a difference. And you know, we base our approach on science, and we base our approach on having 3 chambers that collaborate and compromise. And so as you're seeing language in this standard, I just wanted to recognize that there's a lot of work that's gone into this to get us where we are. And also that any feedback you give, we don't see as a negative, we see that as positive. And so please do take the time to express your thoughts. We will be bringing them up and considering them as best we can as we work together to collaborate on this process over time. Um, we are all passionate about these issues, and each of us have the areas that we are most passionate about. But don't hesitate to reach out to your board representatives. Don't reach out to engage through the platforms that we have. Yeah, the science and the collaboration is what makes us strong. So thank you. I don't need to take more time than that, but I appreciate you all taking the time to be with us.
All right, so since I gave Justin the control over being host of the webinar, I don't get to unmute myself if I mute. I'm at his whim, but thank you, Paul. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for being here today. We did have one more question that came through on climate change. And was there a specific reason for creating optional indicators, like the encouragement for longer rotations rather than including them in existing or revised indicators as evidence for conformance? I see the potential for confusion on the part of certificate holders thinking that these are in fact new requirements. Yeah, so thank you, Klaus, and would ask you please to take a very close look at that particular indicator. The idea was, again, around trying to encourage additional carbon sequestrations, carbon storage with this climate change topic in mind. And it was set up so to be specifically an opportunity also to, as a trade-off, be able to have some additional flexibility around regional requirements. So I'm hopeful that the indicator that the working group proposed and that the standard development group worked on does in fact present itself in that way. We do have a couple of other optional indicators, such as the two that provide an opportunity for providing rationale for variation or alternatives to the regional requirements. So I don't think it's unique in the standard, and hopefully there won't be confusion, but please do take a good close look at it. Would appreciate that. All right, so I think where are we in time? It is time to move on to our final topic today. So I am going to again share my screen. And again, ask Justin to give me a thumbs up. Can you see the high grading slide? Excellent, thank you. All righty, so high grading in particular, but other exploitative practices continue to be a concern in the United States. It's certainly one of the things that we're hoping that FSC is helping to address. And when I say high grading, and when I talk about exploitative practices, I'm talking about situations where the most valuable materials are removed from a forest in a harvest and leave behind a highly degraded forest, one that's not going to go through normal regeneration processes due to the elements that have been removed from it. We've had lots of discussion around these and recognize that different names and different terms are used in different parts of the country. Recognizing that selective harvests definitely have a very positive role to play in certain situations. They're not all negative. But there's also been a lot of discussion throughout the years and also as part of this development process for draft 1 of the revised standard, which is why do we not call these out in the standard? Why do we not call them by name and prohibit them? Instead, we've taken, the standard takes the FSC approach, which is that outcome-oriented approach. It's about describing through the indicators what is the intended or the desired outcome that will help to ensure conformance with the principles and with FSC's principles and criteria. In doing this, we have a number of different indicators that all together, if you're going to achieve the outcomes in those indicators, that would make something like a high grading harvest virtually impossible. We have continued forward with this approach for draft 1. I think all of the indicators that I would point to in this particular context have been maintained with a couple of minor enhancements to them. More specifically, we continue to have an indicator which focuses on timber harvest and ensuring that they achieve the defined management objectives and desired future conditions and continue to improve or maintain forest health and quality. We continue to have an indicator in draft 1, which is about ensuring that the activities that occur within the management unit are helping to maintain or enhance the plant species composition, distribution, and frequency of occurrence in a way that would be similar to how they would occur if within the management unit in a more natural type situation. There's still an indicator in there requiring that the management plan include within it a description about how it is that the management systems that are being implemented will in fact sustain the forest ecosystems over the long term. And then the last one I point to, and there are many other places that I think that all together help to serve this purpose of ensuring that exploitative harvesting practices are not possible within FSC certified forests. But these were the ones that I wanted to focus on today. The fourth one here is about harvest plans, and harvest plans are already required in the existing standard with a focus on ensuring that they are clear on how they will help to achieve desired outcomes. But there's a new component in that there's now, and again, this is also helping us align with some of the changes in the FSC principles and criteria. But there's a new component of this and an expectation that harvest plans will also describe how the environmental values that were identified through the assessment that we talked about earlier and for Principle 6, how they will be protected or enhanced through the harvesting activities that are planned. So that's all I really had on that one in terms of background. Again, we want to open it up to your questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen at this point again. And from Andrew, I think the concept is there, lots of flexibility. Will there be verifiers or more guidance to help prove conformance around anti-high grading? Some of this stuff is really in the eyes of the beholder. So at this time, the draft 1 does not include any verifiers. If you think that that would be something that would be very important or help to ensure conformance in any of the indicators that I mentioned, or possibly other places in the standard that you think it would be important for helping to ensure that we don't have high grading within FSC certified forest, encourage you to provide that feedback as part of your consultation comments. I'm gonna just wait and see if we have any additional questions or comments here. All right, while we do that, want to ask, I think we have a couple of other standard development group members on the call, and wanted to ask, we have Tim Beyer, Sarah Billig, and Shona Humphreys, and also it looks like Ted Wright. Justin, if you could unmute our standard development group members. And I just want to give an opportunity to any of you. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Sarah. Mike Hauser is also on. I should see the image up here in front of me. Justin, if you would unmute those folks, and if any of you have anything that you would like to add or say related to the topics today, or reflecting on what you've been working on over the standard development group has been really, particularly a subcommittee of the standard development group has been really focused on this for the last 6 to 8 months, taking the recommendations from the technical working group. If any of you would like to say anything, I think we have a little bit of time right now.
I would just reiterate a little bit of what Paul said about how we are embedded in science and how we use the strength of our 3 chambers to have those conversations to come up with the standard that maintains or raises the bar, but also makes it feasible to be applied to a broad range of ownerships and land types. And the technical working group certainly must applaud the work that they did over the last 2 years in handing off to us a draft standard that was then looked at by the Policy and Standards Committee, again, which has representation from all 3 chambers over a 6-month period before we recommended it to the full board. I would again reiterate what Paul said, is that our strength is also in you as stakeholders, and that your comments today are certainly logged and are a matter of record, and will be something that we will be able to use in that next phase of going from this draft to the second draft. But we also ask that you take advantage of the consultation platform to again log those concerns. And if you haven't seen updates to that consultation platform, Amy did add a couple of upgrades in the last week. One is a set of crosswalks to show that how indicators from the existing standard have been incorporated into the revision, as well as under the how to submit comments section, a guide to the consultation platform. And this provides a little bit more guidance for people that might be a little bit overwhelmed by the task at hand, and gives you a little bit more pointed direction on, if you only have a couple hours or if you only have a couple of days, how you might approach that. So we thank you for participating today. And again, I would remind you that if you're going to take part in the next 2 sessions next week, if you have an opportunity, if you've read the issue brief and you have some questions or comments ahead of time that you can send in, it certainly would help us formulate the session a little bit better. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Tim. Do I have any other standard development group members who are here and would like to say something?
Yeah, this is Sarah. Hey, everybody. Thanks for showing up today. Very much appreciated. Wanted to just quickly reflect on the hard work that's been put in by the working group, the very hard work that's been put in by the working group to make this standard come to light. And the standards development group had lots of great conversations as well. And just a reflection that as you review this draft, keep in mind the idea that in a good negotiation, no one comes out super happy, right? We're looking at this through the lens of, can you live with this? Is this something you can live with? And would ask you to filter your comments that way so that we can get to the best outcome we possibly can. And thanks again, everybody, for your time and attention.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. We did have one more question that came in regarding the number of drafts. Did I have somebody else who wanted to say something? Did I cut somebody off? Okay, cool. We had a question about how many drafts will be written before a final draft is published. So we are required to develop 3 drafts. The first draft is the one, the first phase of the first draft is out for public consultation right now. The second phase will come in a couple of months, like I said, with family forest indicators, plantation indicators, and the supplementary requirements for Forest Service lands. Those together are being considered draft 1 and the consultation on draft 1. Next year, mid-year, is the anticipated time for a second draft public consultation. At that time, all of the pieces will be together. So we only have that one consultation mid-year next year on a draft 2 of the standard. We will be working on force testing at the same time. We need to do some testing, look at new indicators or new components of indicators, and ensure that they will in fact work in the field, in the forest. That'll be during our second consultation on draft 2. Then a third draft is developed by the Standard Development Group, and that's the draft that is submitted to FSC International for the formal approval process. All right, so we are getting close to the end here. I want to thank, again, I want to reiterate what you've heard from the Standard Development Group members who have spoken. We really appreciate your participation in the webinar today. Please, we really would like to hear from you as part of this consultation. The comments that are submitted through the FSC consultation, consultation platform, those will be formally considered. They will be part of a consultation report that's put together so you can see what happened to your comments. Certainly what you've heard today will be taken back by the standard development groups, and they'll have the materials from the webinar today, but the consultation platform is the way to go for formal comments, please. And then again, a reminder of the webinars next week. One of them, I believe it's the Tuesday webinar, is on free, prior, and informed consent, and also on forced workers. And then the Wednesday webinar is on the Conservation Areas Network. That's a new requirement in the principles, in the International Generic Indicators, and also high conservation values and representative sample areas. And as Tim noted, if you, as part of registering, any questions that you can send in advance or send them to the fm.revision.us.fsc.org email address, and that will help us to prepare for those webinars. That would be great. Let's see, one more question. Rough timeline for a final product approved by FSC International. Yeah, so if we make it through, if we don't hit any major roadblocks along the way, the goal to submit that draft 3 would be near the end of next year or the very beginning of 2022. The approval process through FSC International, in watching what happens with the other standards that have gone through this recent revision process, that approval process is typically taking somewhere between 6 months and 18 months. But we are looking at what is it that we can do from the FSC US perspective to kind of make sure that what we submit really is already addressing some potential concerns. We're looking at whether there are anything that we can do to maybe even get like a pre-review of our standard, so that when we get to that final approval process, it will be as streamlined and as fast as possible. At the international level, there is first a review by international staff in Bonn. There's a peer review, I believe, that they're typically doing in hiring a consultant or somebody else to take a look at the standard and compare it to the expectations. Then when the staff believe that it's ready to go, it's submitted to the International Policy and Standards Committee, and that committee has delegated authority from the FSC International Board of Directors to make decisions about the national standards. The decisions that they can make are to approve a standard, to not approve a standard, or to approve a standard with conditions. And then we would have to work through with the international staff on ensuring that the conditions are fulfilled. All right, so thank you so very much once again. We're a couple of minutes over here. Appreciate your participation. We look forward to seeing you at next week's webinars, and we look forward to seeing your comments through the consultation platform. Thank you all very, very much.